Hey everybody, good morning. It's Elizabeth Cornice McLaughlin. As always, it's Resistance Live for Monday, October 7th, 2019. Not gonna put any gloss on it today. Just warning you all about that. There's no gloss today on where we find ourselves. So I'll give everybody a couple of minutes to get on board here. Man, it like the state of where we find ourselves this morning is incredibly depressing. And I will just tell you all that with where we sit at the moment, with so many moving pieces, the failure of the House to move is really just distressing. But I'll say more about that. I'll give everybody a couple of minutes to start logging in here because we have a mountain of stuff to talk about. And of course, over the weekend was not slow by any stretch of the imagination. And there's way more to consider in terms of what's likely to hit this week. All right. So let's just start with the obvious little bit of breaking news that hit last night, thanks to the White House. We got a press release late last night, like here on the West Coast, it was probably 8 o'clock, that the president is basically given the go-ahead for Erdogan, the president of Turkey, to invade Syria and start killing the Kurds. If you're not aware of why this matters, I'm going to give you like the shortest possible version of this. And there's a lot of great threads on Twitter this morning that explain the totality of this. As somebody who protested all the way back to Gulf War I, I can tell you that this is a profound betrayal of our allies in the region. The Kurds have been fighting alongside us to destroy ISIS for a very long time. One of the things that's especially distressing about this is that apparently in the negotiations leading up to the president's out of left field announcement last night, which by the way did not apparently have any notification to the Pentagon in advance, no discussion with our allies in Europe, no conversations with London or Paris or anyone else who we would assume to be an invested and interested party in all of this, no conversations with our allies. Apparently in the lead up to this, because the negotiations were ongoing and the assumption on the Kurdish side of things inside Syria was that there would be a resolution reached, Trump apparently convinced the Syrians to pull back their defenses from the border with Turkey. And that means that fundamentally Erdogan can now waltz right into Turkey and just start killing people, which is something, by the way, that he's wanted to do for a very long time. There's statements even from this president from January of this year to the effect that if it were not for his restraint of Erdogan in this, Erdogan would already be perpetrating genocide against the Kurds. So the scope of where this is really, really bad. And, we've seen a lot of unexpected, usual Trump allies come out this morning very much in outrage related to this, including Lindsey Graham, who called into Fox and Friends this morning and said that, he basically, I'm paraphrasing, but he kind of was profoundly upset by what he had learned, what we'd seen. And the president literally like 2 minutes before I went on the air tweeted out, because that's apparently foreign policy now, it's tweets, that if Turkey did anything that he and his great and unmatched wisdom deemed to be inappropriate, he would ruin the economy of Turkey. That, by the way, is not foreign policy. And it's also offensive. And so, it's the thing I just want to make really clear here is that the destabilization of this region is not just about Syria and Turkey, and it's not just about our allyship with the Kurds over decades at this point. Even during the Iraq War, I'll just mention, like, the Kurds were the folks who very much wanted to bring democracy to Iraq. This betrayal, and then the consequence of this from the standpoint of Syria, being invaded, Kurds being murdered, mass murdered. It has the potential for the entire region. And it just, as many have pointed out this morning, brings to our doorstep an absolute lack of untrustworthiness amongst our allies. this was just like a unilateral decision by Trump. And by the way, I think I don't need to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. This is exactly what Putin has wanted forever. So, you know, I already put on Twitter this morning that it's just exhausting. It's relentlessly exhausting, and it's exhausting for everyone who's living under it, and it's exhausting for people who are under threat, and it's exhausting. And it's taking way too long. I'm back to that place now of it's just taking way too long, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But let's get to some of the other breaking news that we've had over the weekend and this morning. So we learned yesterday, courtesy of ABC News Sunday, that the lawyers that are representing the initial whistleblower against the president on issues related to Ukraine now represent at least one more, possibly more than one more, additional whistleblower. This second person being apparently higher up in the chain of command and a firsthand witness to Trump's call with Ukraine on July 25th that has now become this pivotal turning point in what was a months-long effort to leverage dirt out of Ukraine in exchange for aid. The fact that there are multiple whistleblowers is significant. And, particularly, again, I want to remind everybody, you don't have to be a firsthand witness to be a whistleblower. You don't have to, there doesn't have to be the words quid pro quo spoken out of somebody's mouth for what's occurred here to be a crime. You can go back and watch the broadcast from last week if you're curious about that. But the fact that there are multiple whistleblowers is significant. The question, of course, is what's the complaint that's going to be filed? How fast will it make it to the Congress? Is that person going to testify? If so, when? Can they give a closed door deposition like Wednesday? It is significant. And again, I'm just going to tell you, I just feel like the process is now slowed down. And, one of my big concerns that I raised late last week on Twitter, on the broadcast, everywhere, was that if the Democrats lose the narrative here from the standpoint of the political aspects of impeachment as opposed to the legal aspects of impeachment, a reminder to everyone, it's both. The process of impeachment is both political and legal. But if the Democrats lose the trajectory, they lose the momentum, they lose the narrative, the likelihood of getting something, to happen in the Senate from the standpoint of a vote to remove him will grow slimmer by the hour. Again, we need a consistent, propulsive movement toward impeachment. I notwithstanding the fact that nobody was willing to talk on the Sunday shows on behalf of the president yesterday, except for Jim Jordan, who did what he usually does. And Ron Johnson, by the way, who had a complete meltdown on Meet the Press. You should all go watch it if you haven't seen it. Chuck Todd, actually, like newly woke Chuck Todd, was kind of fun yesterday. But the point here is that we have to continue pushing, and there has to be a consistent trajectory, or the Republicans are going to regroup and try to reclaim the narrative, which we've already seen happen. Like the latest version of this is he was joking when he called upon China to investigate Joe Biden and throw the election or interfere in the election. The aspects of where this is that, we're going to continue to see crazy, outrageous behavior from this president also the longer that this goes on. Over the weekend, we learned that in retribution for the initial whistleblower complaint, he's now cut staff at the NSA, which is an incredibly stupid move on his part because it, by the way, creates yet another national security crisis for the United States to not have a fully staffed national security advisory office. I mean, there were a bunch of people on the question feed. I just want to say this morning who said things like, it's the reason why this isn't moving is because, they're all being paid off by the same big donors. And I actually don't believe that. I think that what's happening here is that there is a reserve that is being, adopted by the Democrats at this moment in time that would work in any standard administration. And still, notwithstanding the fact that Adam Schiff has definitely knocked things up a couple of notches, there is still not a response at the pace that is required to stop this onslaught of authoritarianism. It's just every hour right now, it's something new. So anyway, multiple whistleblowers. I'm sure we're going to hear more about that today. The other bit of breaking news this morning was that the federal district court that took the case to try to stop. So it was filed by Trump and his people. I should back up for a second. I'm getting a hold of Trump's taxes. The federal judge who heard that litigation threw it out of court this morning. with a scathing 75-page opinion, by the way, that also like threw the idea that a sitting president couldn't be indicted under the bus. Now, let me just say this. That's what we consider to be an advisory portion of the opinion. So it's not precedential authority. No other court can rely on it to say now we can indict a sitting president. But it did draw out the insanity of having a DOJ, counsel's opinion basically relied upon as if it's the sitting law of the land ruled upon by the Supreme Court when it's not. So it was a very solid opinion out of the federal court for the reason why Trump's demand that his taxes not be disclosed to the state district attorney, the New York City district attorney, didn't hold water. And you all remember, by the way, that at the time that case was filed, I was basically like, good luck with that. He doesn't have a leg to stand on. And lo and behold, here we are. However, there was an emergency appeal filed to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which you all will remember. Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, one of the most respected, if not the most respected. The DC Circuit is probably in close competition. Federal Circuit Court of Appeals in the country. And the Second Circuit, within minutes, issued a stay of the execution of that court's order because the lower court's order initially said you have until Friday to turn over the tax returns. That's not at all unusual. I just want to say this. And this is one of the reasons, if you've been watching this broadcast for a long time, you know why I have been so upset about how long it's taken to even file litigation on things like subpoenas and, refusals to testify and executive privilege, because the court system it takes a long time to move your way through this. And this is an issue concerning the president of the United States and whether or not his tax return should be publicly accessible. And, the ruling, the legislation out of New York State saying his state tax returns are, the whole point here is that this is all the way that it normally works. So the Second Circuit issues a stay until they have an opportunity to hear the case. It's a temporary stay. It's not a permanent stay, but it could take months. That wouldn't surprise me. So this is one of the reasons why back in March and long before that, when I was getting very upset about how slow it was taking House Judiciary to do anything and how the lack of enforcement on subpoenas was, just an incredibly stupid move from a legal strategy perspective. Again, this ruling in this particular case has come down quite fast. But anybody who honestly thought that we were going to see Trump's tax returns this week, thanks to the opinion who came out this morning, doesn't really understand the way the judicial system works. This stay is totally normal. Nobody's been paid off. One of you suggested it this morning on the feed. No Second Circuit justices have been paid off by the Trump administration. And besides, that's not how it works. It takes more than one justice to do this. So point being, this is very standard and also very disappointing and also an indication of the reasons why the fast movement on this stuff is so important. They should be subpoenaing the president right now. We did have subpoenas issue on Friday concerning things having to do with records for Ukraine, and Mick Mulvaney got a subpoena, and Adam Schiff did what he said he was going to do. There were all these subpoenas that were issued to the White House. They should be subpoenaing Trump for testimony right now because he's not going to show up for it, and they're going to have to litigate it in court. There's all sorts of things here in terms of moving the ball forward that could be happening that aren't. And as somebody who used to do these kind of like huge scale litigations where there were huge litigation teams involved, they've got enough lawyers to be able to be doing this right now, or they should. If they don't, they've just not hired right. But they've got great lawyers, working as counsel for instance, House Judiciary, who could be pushing the ball forward here very fast. And it's just, beside me why we're not doing that. All right, well, I've overlapped anyway into my last topic, which is the delay on impeachment. I want to remind you all, the House is still out of session. We're in the middle of the Jewish holidays. Yom Kippur is this week. And blessings to all those of you who are fasting. I just want to say this, though. We're not going to have a vote until after that. This is one of the reasons why last week in the middle of these two holidays, I was like, Nancy should call back the House. Because we're not going to see anything until we're past this, until, the earliest they could have a vote at this point is Thursday. There are more people testifying this week. Again, we're going to see testimony from the former ambassador who was the subject of Rudy Giuliani's smear campaign inside the State Department. We may see testimony from the second whistleblower. Who knows? But, the earliest that we're going to have a vote on articles of impeachment by any stretch of the imagination, the earliest it could be is Thursday. So, we're in for another hell of a week. I myself am finding I'm just in a state today where I'm like very tired and very frustrated. I'm sure I'm not alone. I want to encourage all of you to do everything that you need to do this week to get through it, because it's going to be worse than last week. And last week was worse than the week before that. And we're really in the thick of it right now, because apart from anything else, the president knows he's cornered. And that means that his behavior is going to be irrational and off the rails crazy. So, I just want to recommend that you do whatever you need to do this week to keep going. I did have a shout out to please mention getting out the vote, which I feel like I do every day right now, but I'm going to do it again. Postcards to Voters has some new campaigns underway right now. You should go check them out. By the way, today is also the last day to register to vote in Kentucky for that very hotly contested Senate seat that is occupied by Mitch McConnell. So if you live in Kentucky, go make sure that you've got yourself registered. Check the voting rolls to make sure that your name has not been scrubbed, because that's happening all over the country right now. And I just want to make it really clear that, activism does help. Your action does help. And we'll see what happens there. One quick question that's just coming up right now, which I'll take as the last question for today, is can I explain the situation with Rick Perry? But that's a loaded question. One of the things that happened over the weekend, and I mean that in a facetious way, one of the things that happened over the weekend was the president blamed Rick Perry for making a phone call, his phone call to Ukraine and his months-long attempt. Let's not forget, this is not just about one phone call. We have documented strategy now going all the way back to June to try to get Ukraine to dig up false dirt on the Bidens or create dirt on the Bidens in exchange for aid, okay? What happened over the weekend was the president blamed Rick Perry for this. He said Rick Perry, urged him to have a conversation with Zelensky about natural gas. And by the way, the other thing we learned yesterday was that Rudy Giuliani was trying to find a way to route money from a Ukraine gas deal to some of his colleagues, because, they're also invested in investigating corruption. We do not yet know the full scope of what Rick Perry did there. We know he's a part of the text messages in some cases. We know that, yes, he's the energy secretary, so he would be invested in having a conversation about natural gas, maybe. But I want to remind you all of one thing, okay? The president of the United States doesn't take orders from the secretaries that sit in the cabinet. So the idea that this was all Rick Perry's terrible idea and he's somehow under the cover of some other scheme or some other idea convinced the president to engage in a dirt for aid deal is, once again, a load of horse shit. By the way, speaking of horse shit, I should just also mention one other thing. Mitt Romney can't be impeached. So, the president's out there kind of saying all this stuff about how Mitt Romney should be impeached. We can't impeach senators in this country. There are means for them to be removed from office otherwise, but they don't get impeached. So, again, this is one of those moments to remember that the president's Twitter feed is usually not reliable. He's not trustworthy. He makes random shit up. He's doing it this morning. And from a legal standpoint, the other thing I'm just going to say here is that Rick Perry may be wrapped up in this somehow, but the buck stops with the president. And any idea that it doesn't, that somehow Rick Perry is to blame for this, is nuts. I know I'm trying really hard not to use the pejorative terminology for mentally unstable, but it's nuts. So, let's just kind of continue to keep an eye on the fact that, the president is the person who has placed the phone call. The president is the person who has done what he has done with regard to Syria and Turkey as of last night. The president is the person who is personally invested in interfering in the 2020 election for his own gain. It's the president and his enablers, but it's the president. No one else is to blame for this shit. It's the president and the people who are allowing him to do it. And that's really where our focus has to be. It's not Joe Biden's fault, that's for sure. Not Rick Perry's. All right, that's it for today. You all can tell I'm a little bit punchy. I'm tired. I'm frustrated, and I'm mad. I want it's enough. It's been enough for years now. It's enough. He has to go. All right, that's enough for today. I will talk to all of you tomorrow, regular time. We're on deck for the regular schedule all week this week. Please take care of yourselves. And of course, I'm live tweeting as much as I can. I'm heavy in the writing of my book right now, but I'm live tweeting as much as I can. All right, much love to all of you. Bye.